High Admiral Cel-Era of the Zarkeli Federation stood at the command center of the starship Eternal Dawn, her iridescent scales shifting from deep blue to troubled purple as she studied the holographic display of Earth. The planet's blue-white marble should have filled her with the usual excitement of first contact. Instead, her secondary hearts beat with growing concern. "General Valthor, report," she commanded, her crystalline voice sharp with urgency. The general's tentacles rippled with agitation as he projected the sensor data onto the main view screen. "The facilities are widespread, Admiral. Every major population center has multiple complexes where elderly humans are contained. Some house hundreds in single structures." Cel-Era's dorsal spines bristled. In Zarkeli culture, elders were revered, living freely among their families who competed for the honor of hosting them. The thought of imprisoning them was beyond comprehension. "Show me," she ordered. The screen filled with images of large institutional buildings surrounded by carefully manicured but fenced grounds. Security cameras monitored every entrance. Inside, elderly humans sat in wheeled chairs or lay in beds, many alone in small rooms. The timestamps showed some hadn't left these rooms in days. "By the Ancient Ones," Cel-Era whispered. "They caged their wisdom keepers." "It gets worse," Valthor continued. "They're regulated by strict schedules. When to eat, sleep, even when they're allowed visitors. Many appear to be medicated into docility." Lieutenant Cursa, their xenobiologist, spoke up from her station. "Admiral, I've been analyzing their media broadcasts. They call these places nursing homes and assisted living facilities. They claim they're for care and protection." "Protection?" Cel-Era's scales flashed anger red. "From what?" "Their own families. Their society seems to view aging as a medical condition to be managed rather than a natural state to be honored," Cursa explained. "They separate their elderly from their communities, placing them under constant surveillance and control." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had achieved spaceflight, developed impressive technology, and showed signs of a sophisticated culture. Yet they imprisoned their most precious knowledge-bearers. "The human United Nations is still awaiting our response to their greeting transmission," Communications Officer Rentel reminded them. "They're eager to establish diplomatic relations." Cel-Era's scales settled into a determined silver. "Send them this. The Zarkeli Federation acknowledges your greeting. Before proceeding with diplomatic recognition, we require explanation regarding your treatment of elderly citizens. Our delegation will arrive at the specified coordinates in 48 Earth hours to investigate these facilities firsthand." "Admiral," Valthor cautioned, "this is highly irregular for first contact protocol." "So is discovering systematic elder imprisonment," Cel-Era countered. "I will not establish relations with a species that cages its wisdom keepers without understanding why. Prepare a diplomatic team. And Valthor, include our elder rights specialists." As the crew scrambled to comply, Cel-Era returned her gaze to Earth's image. The Zarkeli had encountered many strange customs in their explorations, but this struck at the very core of their values. What kind of species locks away its living history? She wondered aloud. And what else might they be capable of? The Eternal Dawn maintained its orbit, its crystalline hull reflecting Earth's sunlight, while its crew prepared for what would surely be one of the most challenging first contact missions in Federation history. Humanity was about to learn that in the galaxy, elder rights were taken very seriously indeed. In Washington, D.C., UN Secretary General Helena Chen was having a very bad day. The alien response had thrown the entire diplomatic corps into chaos. Emergency meetings were being called. Elder care experts were being consulted. And somewhere in the Pentagon, military officials were nervously wondering if humanity's treatment of its senior citizens might actually trigger an interstellar incident. The clock was ticking. They had 48 hours to figure out how to explain human elder care to a species that clearly had very different ideas about aging. Somehow, they needed to bridge a cultural gap they hadn't even known existed until an hour ago. Chen looked out her office window at the sunset painting the capital skyline. Somewhere up there, an alien ship was watching, judging, their scales probably turning whatever color meant horrified disgust in their culture. "Well," she muttered, reaching for her phone. "At least they didn't see our prisons first." Dr. Sarah Chen wiped exhaustion from her eyes as she hurried through the corridors of Golden Sunset Care Center. In the 36 hours since the Zarkeli transmission, she'd been promoted from head of geriatric medicine to humanity's unofficial ambassador for elder care. Now, with alien delegates due to arrive in less than 12 hours, she was racing to prepare her facility and staff for unprecedented scrutiny. Dr. Chen, Maya Rodriguez, her head nurse, jogged to catch up. "The residents are asking questions about the aliens. Mrs. Patterson is organizing a welcome committee." Sarah couldn't help but smile. "Trust Eleanor Patterson, former diplomat and current resident troublemaker, to take charge of first contact at 92. Tell her no unauthorized diplomatic initiatives until after the official meeting." "You try telling Mrs. Patterson anything," Maya muttered, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the building's eye. "Dr. Chen, Director Williams from the State Department is on line 1. Also, Mr. Johnson in room 214 is requesting his afternoon walk." And there it was, the constant balance between high-level crisis management and the daily needs of their residents. "Tell Williams I'll call back. Mr. Johnson's walk takes priority." They found Frank Johnson already in his wheelchair by the garden door, his weathered face brightening at their approach. "Thought you might have forgotten me with all this alien business." "Never," Sarah assured him, taking control of his chair. To Maya, she added, "Continue the preparations. I've got this one." As they entered the garden, Frank tilted his face toward the sun. "Heard these aliens think we're prisoners," he said conversationally. "Guess they never met my daughter Jenny. That girl would move heaven and earth to give me the best care possible." Sarah pushed the wheelchair along the flower-lined path, choosing her words carefully. "The Zarkeli have a different approach to elder care. In their culture, older citizens live with their families." "Sure, that's nice if you can manage it." Frank nodded. "But Jenny's got 3 kids, 2 jobs, and a husband with health issues of his own. Here, I get round-the-clock care, my friends are nearby, and she can visit without worrying about being my full-time nurse." Above them, a shadow briefly darkened the sky. Another military aircraft patrolling since the alien arrival. Frank tracked it with the sharp eyes that had once served him as an air traffic controller. "Bet those aliens would be mighty surprised to learn who really runs this place," he chuckled. Sarah thought of the resident council meetings, the activity committees, the passionate debates about menu changes and entertainment schedules. They certainly would. Back inside, Sarah found controlled chaos. The State Department had sent a team to prepare the facility, but they were being thoroughly managed by the residents themselves. Eleanor Patterson had somehow obtained official briefing documents and was holding court in the common room, coaching her fellow residents on diplomatic protocol. "Remember," Eleanor's voice carried clearly as Sarah passed, "we're not just representing this facility, we're representing Earth's entire approach to elder care. And I refuse to let some well-meaning but misguided aliens think we're victims." In her office, Sarah finally returned Director Williams' call. His harried face filled her screen immediately. "Dr. Chen, please tell me everything's under control at your facility." "Define control," Sarah replied dryly. "My residents are organizing their own diplomatic response. Half the staff is taking crash courses in xenobiology, and I just heard someone suggest decorating the front entrance with both Earth and Zarkeli flags, though I'm not sure where they got the design for the latter." Williams blanched. "We need this to go smoothly. The Zarkeli are influential in the galactic community. Their elder rights campaigns have apparently sparked multiple revolutions. Then they should appreciate meeting humans who advocate for themselves." Sarah countered. "Director, I know you've sent a team of diplomats, but I suggest letting my residents take point on this. They're not just recipients of care. They're stakeholders in the system. They're civilians, Dr. Chen. This is a delicate diplomatic situation. They're retired ambassadors, judges, teachers, and military officers. Sarah interrupted. Eleanor Patterson negotiated 3 peace treaties during the water wars. Frank Johnson handled more crisis situations as an air traffic controller than most diplomats see in their careers. Trust them. Trust us. Before Williams could respond, the AI chimed again. Dr. Chen, Mrs. Patterson requests your presence in the common room. The residents have drafted a preliminary presentation for the Zarkali delegation. Sarah turned back to the screen. Excuse me, Director. Apparently, I'm needed for an emergency diplomatic briefing. Later that evening, as Sarah reviewed the residents' presentation, she realized humanity might have accidentally stumbled upon the perfect representatives for this first contact. Who better to explain Earth's elder care system than the people who had helped shape it, who lived it every day, who understood both its flaws and its necessity? The Zarkali were coming to investigate what they perceived as imprisonment. They would instead meet a community of engaged, empowered seniors ready to challenge their preconceptions. And maybe, just maybe, both species would learn something valuable about caring for their elders. The morning sun caught the crystalline forms of the Zarkali delegation as they materialized in the Golden Sunset Care Center's garden. High Admiral Cellera's scales shifted through shades of diplomatic blue, though her Honor Guard's colors betrayed their tension with flickers of alert orange. Eleanor Patterson, seated regally in her wheelchair at the head of the welcoming committee, merely raised an eyebrow. Well, she remarked to Dr. Chen, they're certainly more dramatic than the Kazakhstani delegation I once hosted. Cellera approached, her translator converting her crystalline tones into smooth English. I am High Admiral Cellera of the Zarkali Federation. We are here to investigate the treatment of your wisdom keepers. Eleanor wheeled forward, every inch the diplomat she'd been for 40 years. I am Eleanor Patterson, elected president of the Golden Sunset Resident Council, former ambassador to the United Asian Alliance, and very much not imprisoned. Her sharp eyes met Cellera's multifaceted ones. Though I appreciate your concern. The Admiral's scales flickered with surprise, whether at Eleanor's forthright manner or her credentials wasn't clear. You lead this facility. We govern ourselves, in partnership with the staff, Eleanor corrected. Dr. Chen and her team provide medical care and support, but we residents make the decisions about our daily lives. Perhaps you'd like to see how that works. Before Cellera could respond, Frank Johnson wheeled up beside Eleanor. Admiral, I served 50 years in air traffic control. Know what that taught me? Sometimes what looks like confinement from the outside is actually a carefully managed system for people's safety and well-being. The Zarkali elder rights specialist, Vernax, stepped forward, her scales a troubled purple. Yet you are separated from your families, your communities. My daughter visits 3 times a week, Frank countered. But she has her own family to care for. Here, I have independence without burdening her. Plus, he grinned, the poker games are better. Independence. Cellera's translator somehow conveyed her skepticism. With locks on the doors, guards at the entrances, security, Dr. Chen interjected, to protect vulnerable residents. Many of our people have medical conditions that affect memory or judgment. The locks and monitoring systems keep them safe while maximizing their freedom within those constraints. Perhaps, Eleanor suggested, you'd understand better if you saw our council in action. We're actually scheduled to debate changes to the physical therapy program this morning. You're welcome to observe. The next hour proved enlightening for both species. The Zarkali watched in growing astonishment as the resident council conducted a passionate but orderly debate about exercise equipment, activity schedules, and the controversial proposal to add virtual reality systems to the therapy room. The motion to incorporate VR training passes, 15-3, Eleanor announced, then turned to their guests. You see, Admiral, we're not passive recipients of care. We're active participants in shaping our community. Vernax's scales had shifted to a thoughtful green. Among our people, elders live with their families until the end. It is our most sacred tradition. A beautiful tradition, Eleanor acknowledged, when it works. But human society has changed. Families are smaller, more scattered. Both parents often work. Medical care is more complex. She gestured around the room. This isn't imprisonment, it's adaptation. Cell Era moved to a window, watching residents in the garden below. Some were exercising, others tending plants, while a group gathered around what appeared to be a heated game of chess. Your approach is different from ours, but perhaps not as concerning as we first feared. Different isn't always wrong, Dr. Chen offered. Though I admit, we could probably learn from each other. Your society's reverence for elders, combined with our structured support systems. Indeed, the Admiral's scales shifted to a new color, one that made her honor guard straighten in surprise. Perhaps this mission should be less about investigation and more about exchange. Your medical technologies, combined with our life extension capabilities. Eleanor's eyes sparkled. Now that sounds like the beginning of a productive diplomatic dialogue. Though I warn you, Admiral, I may be retired, but I haven't lost my touch at negotiations. Mrs. Patterson, Celera replied, her scales now shimmering with what the humans would later learn was amusement. I would expect nothing less from a wisdom keeper of your experience. The tension that had permeated the facility began to dissolve. As the Zarkelli delegation toured the building, they saw not a prison but a community. They watched Dr. Chen's staff respond to medical emergencies with practiced efficiency. They observed residents teaching classes in their areas of expertise, everything from Earth history to quantum physics. They began to understand that humans had created something unique, a system that balanced safety with autonomy, medical care with personal freedom. You know, Frank commented to Vernax as they watched a physical therapy session, we were all pretty worried about this visit. Thought you might be coming to liberate us, whether we wanted it or not. The elder rights specialist's scales flushed with embarrassment. We may have jumped to conclusions based on our own cultural biases. Happens to the best of us. Frank chuckled. But here's something to consider. True respect for elders means respecting our choices, even when they're different from what you'd choose. As the day drew to a close, what had begun as a diplomatic crisis was transforming into something unexpected. The foundation for a partnership that would revolutionize elder care across the galaxy. Human pragmatism and innovation meeting Zarkali reverence and life extension technology. A bridge built not despite their differences, but because of them. The emergency alarms at Golden Sunset Care Center pierced the pre-dawn, quiet 3 days after the Zarkali delegation's initial visit. Dr. Sarah Chen sprinted down the corridor toward the source, Eleanor Patterson's room. Behind her, she could hear the crystalline sound of Zarkali movement. The medical exchange team had also responded to the alert. She found Eleanor gasping for breath, her normally sharp eyes unfocused. The room's medical eye was already reporting vitals. Patient experiencing severe cardiac event. Blood pressure critical. Oxygen saturation dropping. Move. Vernax shouldered past, her scales pulsing emergency red. The Zarkali medical specialist's sensory tendrils extended, reading biosignatures humans couldn't perceive. Multiple system cascade beginning. Sarah's hands flew over the emergency kit, starting standard cardiac protocol. Wait. Vernax's secondary hearts were pulsing visible through her translucent scales. Your treatments will stabilize her temporarily, but I'm detecting cellular degradation patterns. This isn't just her heart. Her entire system is failing. Frank Johnson appeared in the doorway, still in his nightclothes. You save her, you hear me? She's got 3 more diplomatic incidents to cause this week. Sarah met Vernax's compound eyes. They both knew standard human medical procedures might not be enough this time. You mentioned Zarkeli life extension technology during the delegation's visit. Could it? It's never been tested on humans, Vernax warned. The biological interfaces. Then I'll be your first test case. Eleanor managed to rasp. Always wanted to make history one more time. High Admiral Celera materialized in the room. Apparently, the Tsar Kali had been monitoring the situation from orbit. The cellular restoration chamber aboard the Eternal Dawn could stabilize her, but transport is impossible in her condition. Sarah finished. She wouldn't survive the journey. Vernax's scales shifted to decision purple. Then we bring the chamber here. She turned to Celera. Admiral, if we modify the emergency transport. Do it, Celera commanded. Her scales flickered communication patterns too fast for the translators to catch. The next 40 minutes were a blur of activity. Tsar Kali technology merged with human medical equipment in ways that would have engineering teams scratching their heads for years to come. Dr. Chen's staff worked seamlessly with Vernax's medical team, translating between human and Tsar Kali medical terminology on the fly. A crystalline chamber materialized in Eleanor's room, its interior swirling with what looked like liquid starlight. Vernax's tendrils danced over its controls, making microscopic adjustments. The cellular restoration process must be precisely calibrated to human biology. Too strong, it could accelerate her cellular metabolism beyond sustainable levels. Too weak. Then we'll find the right balance, Sarah declared, already connecting her medical databases to the chamber systems. Your knowledge of the technology, our understanding of human physiology. Frank wheeled closer to Eleanor's bed. Hang in there, old girl. Can't let the poker championship go on without its defending champion. Eleanor managed a weak smile. Trying to steal my title while I'm down, Johnson. The chamber hummed to life, its crystalline structure resonating at frequencies that made the human's teeth tingle. Vernax and Sarah worked in tandem, each calling out adjustments as Eleanor's vital signs fluctuated. Cellular restoration at 15%. Vernax reported. Human biology is responding differently than expected. The regenerative cascade. Her telomeres, Sarah suddenly exclaimed. They're not just stabilizing, they're regenerating. The chamber isn't just healing the immediate damage. It's reversing accumulated cellular age degradation. Vernax finished, her scales flickering with scientific excitement. The interaction between human DNA repair mechanisms and our restoration field. Admiral Celera's scales shifted to deep thought blue. If this works, the implications for both our species. Worry about galactic medicine later, Frank interrupted. How's Eleanor? As if in answer, Eleanor's vital signs began to stabilize. Color returned to her cheeks. The chamber's starlight swirls gradually dimmed, leaving her bathed in a soft, healthy glow. Well, Eleanor's voice was stronger now, though tired. That was certainly more exciting than my usual morning constitutional. The tension in the room broke. Human nurses hugged Tsar Kali medical technicians, their differences forgotten in the joy of success. Vernax and Sarah were already deep in discussion about the chamber's readings, both speaking too rapidly for the translators to keep up. You know what this means? Frank grinned at Admiral Celera. Now you really can't claim we don't take care of our elders. We just needed a little alien technology to do it better. Celera's scales rippled with amusement. Perhaps we all needed this crisis, Mr. Johnson, to prove that neither of our approaches was perfect alone, but together. Together, Sarah agreed, looking up from her discussion with Vernax. We might have just revolutionized elder care across the galaxy. Eleanor, already sitting up straighter in bed, raised an eyebrow. Wonderful. Now about those diplomatic negotiations we were scheduled to begin today. Eleanor, several voices chorused in protest. What? I feel better than I have in decades, and if we're going to establish new protocols for human Tsar Kali medical cooperation, someone with diplomatic experience should be involved. Her eyes twinkled. Unless you prefer to handle the paperwork yourselves. As the sunrise painted the room in golden light, humans and Tsar Kali alike found themselves laughing. A crisis had been averted, a life had been saved, and in the process, both species had learned that their differences could be their greatest strength. 1 year after the crisis at Golden Sunset Care Center, the facility had become unrecognizable, in the best possible way. Crystalline healing chambers now stood alongside traditional medical equipment. Zarkili medical specialists worked side by side with human doctors. Most remarkably, the center had become a model for a revolutionary new approach to elder care across both civilizations. High Admiral Celera stood in what was now called the Integration Garden, watching Eleanor Patterson lead a group of Zarkili elders in a lesson about human diplomatic history. Her scales shifted to contentment gold as she observed how the crystalline beings leaned forward, entranced by Eleanor's account of the Water Wars negotiations. Amazing how things change, isn't it? Dr. Sarah Chen joined her, tablet in hand displaying the latest data from their joint research program. A year ago, you thought we were imprisoning our elders. Now your people are sending their wisdom keepers here to learn from ours. While human families are adapting our home care technologies to keep their elders with them longer, Celera added, it seems both our species had something to learn. In the garden's other corner, Frank Johnson was teaching a mixed group of human and Zarkili residents the finer points of poker. The Zarkili's color-changing scales had initially seemed like an impossible disadvantage, until they discovered that human micro-expressions were just as foreign to them. Now the weekly poker tournaments were legendary for their cross-species bluffing strategies. Vernax emerged from the medical wing, her scales bright with excitement. The latest results from the hybrid treatment protocols are extraordinary. The combination of our cellular restoration technology with human rehabilitative techniques is showing success rates we never imagined possible. Not to mention the psychological benefits, Sarah added. The Zarkili emphasis on elder wisdom, combined with our focus on maintaining independence, it's creating something entirely new. The facility's AI chimed softly. Reminder, the Intergalactic Elder Rights Council will begin their inspection tour in 30 minutes. Eleanor wheeled over, her eyes sparkling with their restored youth. Well, this should be interesting. Last year we had to convince the Zarkili we weren't running a prison. Now we're showing the galaxy how to revolutionize elder care. The changes weren't limited to Golden Sunset. Across Earth, care facilities were being transformed with Zarkili technology and philosophy. Families were finding new ways to balance care responsibilities with the help of crystalline medical pods and remote monitoring systems. The rigid separation between family care and institutional support was dissolving into a more fluid, integrated approach. Meanwhile, on Zarkili worlds, the influence of human innovation was equally profound. Their traditional family-based care systems were being enhanced with specialized facilities for intensive medical needs. The human concept of assisted independence had sparked a cultural revolution, showing that respecting elders could mean supporting their autonomy rather than just caring for them. You know what the best part is? Frank mused, joining the group after thoroughly trouncing his poker opponents. We did this by admitting we were both wrong and both right at the same time. Indeed, Celera agreed. Your species' ability to adapt and innovate, combined with our reverence for tradition and wisdom. Speaking of innovation, Eleanor interrupted, have you seen the latest designs for the orbital care centers? Solar-powered crystalline structures with gravity control for physical therapy. My granddaughter's engineering team is leading the project. Sarah smiled, remembering the chaos of that first diplomatic visit. From cultural crisis to galactic cooperation in 1 year. Not bad for a species you initially thought was imprisoning its elders. In our defense, Vernax's scales flickered with embarrassment. Those locks and security systems did look rather suspicious without context. Context is everything, Eleanor declared, which is why the next phase is so important. Frank, shall we show them the proposal? Frank grinned and pulled up a holographic display from his wheelchair's enhanced control panel, another product of human Zarkili cooperation. The image showed a massive space station, its design an elegant fusion of human and Zarkili architecture. The Intergalactic Center for Elder Wisdom, he announced proudly, a place where the elders of all species can live, learn, and teach. Part care facility, part university, part cultural exchange hub. The next generation of both our species will grow up seeing elder care not as a burden or obligation, Eleanor added, but as an opportunity for growth, wisdom, and connection. Cell-Era's scales shifted through a rainbow of emotions before settling on a color the humans had learned meant profound hope. When we first arrived at Earth, we thought we were coming to liberate imprisoned elders. Instead, we discovered partners in reimagining how the galaxy cares for its wisdom keepers. The sun was setting over Golden Sunset Care Center, its rays refracting brilliantly through the crystalline healing chambers and Zarkeli visitors. In the garden, human and alien elders continued their activities, their laughter and conversation a testament to how far both species had come. You know, Frank said thoughtfully, sometimes the best innovations come from the biggest misunderstandings. Eleanor chuckled. Just wait until the Andromeda Alliance hears about our poker tournaments. I hear they have 4 arms and telepathic abilities. Now that'll make for an interesting game. As the group laughed, Sarah looked around at what their facility had become. Not just a place of care, but a bridge between worlds, a symbol of how different species could learn from each other and create something greater than either could achieve alone. The future of elder care in the galaxy would never be the same. And it all started because some well-meaning aliens thought humans were running prisons for their elderly. Somewhere in the distance, the poker group erupted in cheers as a novice Zarkeli player successfully bluffed a human champion. Another small victory for intergalactic understanding, one card game at a time.